Are Kahoot and Blooket really the best ways for students to review content? How can we build fluency, literacy, and thinking skills in the science classroom? And what's the role of pencils and paper in the classroom of 2025? Welcome back to another episode of the Teachers on Fire podcast, airing live on YouTube most Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern. My name is Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Today's Teacher on Fire is Marcie Samayoa. Marcie is a high school chemistry teacher from Los Angeles, California, with 10 years of experience in the classroom. Through her blog, Scientists in the Making, she shares evidence-based teaching strategies that connect cognitive science to instructional practices. You can connect with Marcie on LinkedIn, on X at Sci in the Making, on Instagram at Scientists in the Making, and on her website at scientistinthemaking.com. Marcie, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you, my friend, ready to light it up?
I am ready. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, what a pleasure it is. Thank you for responding on short notice and joining me for the show on this Saturday morning. I saw a post from you this week that really, or I should say last week, that really got my attention. And I thought, I need to speak to this teacher because this is a great take and one that we need to hear more of. So here is the post. Let's put it up on the screen. We've got this post here on X. You said, today we spent class time reviewing for the upcoming exam. Some students asked if we'd be playing Kahoot or Blooket. I feel like we have the same students, Marcie. I told them we wouldn't be doing that, and this is what we did instead. So that's where we're headed today. And the first question I want to send your way, Marcie, is this one. When you start threatening, when you start talking, not threatening, when you start talking about not using Kahoot and Blooket, I mean, these are beloved of students and teachers alike. I can just hear some teachers saying, but Marcie, doesn't Kahoot increase student engagement? What would you say to that?
Well, I would agree, actually. Kahoot does increase student engagement, and so does Blooket. But I think the question that us educators need to ask ourselves is what type of engagement?
Right.
So what I noticed in years prior, when students would play Kahoot, they were more concerned about winning than about thinking about the content.
Hmm.
So, as teachers, we want them to look at the question, read the question, think about the concepts deeply, and then answer the question to the best of their abilities. But when students are playing Kahoot, what tends to happen is they gamble, right?
Right.
So instead
Yeah.
of they really do. So instead of going, okay, I could think about the question and answer it, but that's gonna cut my time. Like that's gonna take more time. Sorry, that's what I meant. It's gonna take more time. And so even if I answer it accurately, because I took time, Kahoot is not gonna award me as many points, right? So I'm just gonna gamble and I'm just going to guess. So then you just see students pressing random buttons. They're not even thinking about the question. The second the question pops up, they just choose their favorite color or something like that. So that is engagement, but that's not cognitive engagement. That's behavioral, emotional engagement, which is important. But we really, really, really want to encourage cognitive engagement, and I feel like these apps don't necessarily do that.
It's so true. It's so true. And there are, I mean, to be fair, there are some students out there who are thinking through the questions, but
Of course, of course.
I remember sort of being horrified by seeing around the room, starting to learn, starting to notice exactly what you just described, that there are some students just treating it as a VLT, right? And like, I'm just going to hit blue this time and let's go, and that is not learning. There's not a whole lot of good learning and review happening when we see students doing that. So here was the process that you sort of recommended instead, or that you didn't just recommend, you followed in your own practice. Let's get into the first one. You start with a low stakes short practice test on paper with topics labeled. So break that down. Why are those pieces each important?
Okay, let's just break down the components, right? So
Yeah.
I made it low stakes because you don't want students' attention focusing on their grade.
Right.
right? So you want them to be cognitively engaged with the material. And so by making it low stakes, the chances of them thinking about the material and not their grade increases. So that's why I make it low stakes. I make it short. That way we have time to reflect on our answers. And then each question is labeled with a topic. That way, if students get that question wrong, they know exactly which topic they are struggling with. So, in other words, they're building their metacognition skills, which
Mm-hmm.
is something that I don't think they get to practice a lot. And so, I think by doing it this way, we help build those skills.
I am such a fan of that, and that's a theme throughout this entire process that we're going to unpack today is just the incredible metacognitive skills that students are building, their metacognitive muscles, if you will. Yeah, I love the idea of attaching topics to the questions, and we haven't talked about learning targets. I would do the same with learning targets. It's kind of the same thing. Like, what is this learning about? What does it fall under? So we've got this test on paper, and we'll come back to paper a little bit later in this conversation. Next, you've got turn to neighbors, compare answers, consult the notes, and then discuss differences. So this is an open notes stage of the process, right?
Yes, and just to be clear, when they took the practice test, they did it without their notes and without
Okay.
consulting their partners. This was their own thinking on paper. Just because we want them to get used to the testing environment, right? And I know this might be a little controversial, but I don't allow my students to use their notes during the exam. So, I just wanted to replicate that environment. But then afterwards, when we're reflecting, I do let them use their notes to, cross reference. Maybe they didn't understand the definition, and now they can find the definition in their notes.
Mm-hmm.
And the interacting with the partners is huge. So by interacting with their partners, it encourages them to talk and explain their thought processes. So again, building on their metacognition skills. What do they know? What do they not know? And I know it just. Sorry, let me just think about this for a second. I know some people are like, wait, why don't you just give them the answers?
Right.
Right? Like, why don't you just give them the answers right away? Well, here's the thing. I've been teaching it explicitly for probably a few weeks now. So I know ahead of time that they have the foundational knowledge to do this task and interact with their partners. So and also we want them to be less dependent on the teachers and become more independent on their own learning process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this idea. I mean, as we continue through the process, students can't just tune out or spectate here. I mean, this is activity, this is engagement required. So they're turning to neighbors, they're comparing answers, consulting notes and discussing differences and hopefully reconciling differences, saying, "Oh yeah, oh right, I was a little off track there," or "That's right," and coming to those correct conclusions. Now, I'm just wondering, Marcie, for the teacher out there that worries that, I mean, is it possible in your experience that students reinforce incorrect solutions? Could that ever happen? Or if they've taken good notes in your class, you're not worried about that. Like chances are they're going to come to the right solution, right?
Yeah, I've been using explicit instruction. So I use explicit instruction, and
Right.
throughout explicit instruction, I do so many check for understandings, check for listening. So the chances it might still happen, but the chances of that happening is minimum, right?
Pretty
So it's
low. Yeah.
minuscule. And then
Okay.
in addition to address, like let's say they are reinforcing misconceptions, we do go over the answers as a class afterward,
Right.
which brings us to our probably next step.
Right. Okay. So next so the students have turned to each other. They've consulted their notes, discussed differences, come to correct solutions. Then we come to this one. Students note the topics that they struggled with, and from here they are going where?
So they're going straight to their knowledge organizers. So what I do is I give them a knowledge organizer on each topic. So for each topic, these are the concepts that you're supposed to be familiar with to be able to apply them in the problems on the exam. So what a knowledge organizer looks like is that it has two columns. On the left-hand side, you have questions about the
Okay.
topic, and then on the right-hand side, you have the answers. And so what students do is that they cover the answers with their bookmarks. They have bookmarks. They cover the answers with their bookmarks and they quiz themselves on it. They ask
Mm.
themselves that question, they quiz themselves, and they're able to check if they're accurate or not by checking the answers afterwards. Now, this does take modeling and this does take a lot of practice in the classroom in order for it to be implemented successfully. But after a few practice sessions, students are very open to this process.
Love it. Well, thank you for joining us, educators. If you're finding value here, take a moment and like the video. We're on to step 5. Hopefully, I feel like I'm not doing a very good job of this, Marcie, but
No, you're doing
you're doing
great.
amazing. Thank you so much. So we're on to step 5. Now we've got a second low stakes practice test, this time in Google Forms without topics. So they're not guided as much by the organization. Are these the same questions? Are they different questions? What does this look like?
So they're very similar, but they're different versions of the
Okay.
question. So the process behind them might be the same, but the answers are going to be different. And the reason why I do that is because often what you find is that students just want to memorize the answers,
Right.
right? But and we want them not to memorize the answers. We want them to really reflect on the process instead as to how to arrive to the answers. So it's very important that you don't use the same questions.
Hmm.
And I also do it on Google Forms because I love the shuffle feature that it
Right.
has. So I shuffle the questions. And the reason why I do that is because that promotes interleaving. And according to cognitive science research, interleaving the questions does encourage more effective recall, if that makes sense. So students are
Hmm.
able to see the slight differences between different questions and get, you know, access to that. So, uh, yeah, it helps them prepare for a more realistic exam environment.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just deeper learning. They're not memorizing in sequence the
Exactly.
exact rote answer. It's a little
Yeah.
bit deeper. It requires something more substantial. Now, I have to ask too, I didn't prepare you for this one, but in the Google form, is it all multiple choice at that point, or is it a mix of different formats?
It's a mix of different formats.
Okay.
So ideally, ideally, I would want them all to be free response. But I
Right.
have around 200 students, and that would take a
Okay.
very, very long time to grade.
Yeah.
So I do like some multiple choice and some free response, just to cut the grading. But still, promote that high order thinking processes that we want students to do.
Right. Okay, and then on to the next step. Now, students are, I believe, you'll correct me here in a moment, but I believe they're taking it home, or you suggested they're taking it as homework and trying the test again. And the goal here is to build fluency. So, could you speak to what the test looks like? Did I get that right? And then talk about fluency and why we need to build fluency as a part of their learning, even in a subject like science.
Yeah, so well, let's just start with the fluency part, right? So
Sure.
fluency pretty much means that we want students to not stay stuck on a specific part of the problem. We want them to approach it and know exactly what to do whenever they see that problem. And the reason why we want to do that is because eventually, with fluency, it decreases cognitive load. So our working memory is limited. And so if parts of the problem are already automatic, which aka fluent, then there is more mental space
Mm.
for the reasoning part, for the analyzing part, for those high order thinking processes that we want students to do. So that's why fluency is very important. And chemistry builds on each other. So in chemistry, you need to understand chapter 1 to be able to do chapter 2. You need to understand chapter 2 to be able to do chapter 3. So we want students to build fluency in each chapter. That way, we set them up for success for future learning. So yes, fluency is very important. I think it's important for all classes and
Yeah,
all
of course.
subjects. And so to encourage fluency, well, that just takes practice. And so as homework, I put the Google Forms exam on Google Classroom, and I told them, hey, you can take it as many times as you want at home. And I really want you guys to think about the thinking process, and you model to them. And yes, slightly different versions of the questions. That way they don't just memorize the answers. And you'd be surprised how many of them do it. I saw one student take the exam 5 times at home. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's cool. And then when it comes to the real exam, well, obviously the questions are slightly different, but very similar topics. So it's just preparing them, right,
Yeah.
for the exam.
Yeah, different looks, different formats, different orders. I mean, the more you can shuffle it up, mix it up, the deeper that knowledge, or the more real, the more authentic that understanding will be. Well, thank you so much, Marcie, for walking us through that, and let me know if I left anything out. I'm wondering too, and we're going to talk about AI in a moment in another light, but I'm wondering, have you used any AI tools to mix up those questions or present them in different ways to students?
Well, when it comes to well, no, the Google Forms takes care of that, right? Like the shuffling
Sure.
and stuff. But when it comes to making multiple choice questions, it's
Hmm.
very difficult to make good multiple choice questions,
Yes.
right? And so sometimes what I do, like I create the questions, and then I take a look at the the components that makes up a good multiple choice question, and I ask AI, like, am I following this format? Is this a
Okay.
good multiple choice question? Now, AI is not 100%.
Hmm.
Okay. And I think the problem that some of us have is that we trust it 100%, and you
Mm.
shouldn't. So it will tell me like the benefits and of this question and how I can make it slightly better, but I still use my professional judgment to determine if that's really the case. It just helps guide me, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
that's how I would do it. That's how I use it. Yeah.
So we're going to pivot a little bit, Marcie, and go back to the very first step in this whole process because we talked about students breaking out pencils and paper. And in a way, that's refreshing. I think it's refreshing for a lot of teachers. I don't know what you see and hear in your educator social media circles, but I'm hearing this year more than I can ever recall a bit of a pushback against ed tech, against AI, against different forms of technology in the classroom, and a bit of a return to the conventional, the tactile. You obviously are thinking about this too because you made a point of saying, okay, students are going to start with pencil and paper. So, just in general, I'm not asking you to speak for all teachers here, but what do you think is behind? Are you, first of all, I guess, are you seeing and hearing a bit of this too? And what do you think is behind some of this pushback from teachers around the continent, let's say?
Actually, I guess I'm the correct person to ask because I, they interviewed me for Education Week. Um,
Oh, okay.
I took away their Chromebooks. Yeah, so
Okay.
I don't use. I minimize the use of Chromebooks. So the only time we use Chromebooks is for summative assessments like Google Forms and the online textbook. That's it. I have limited their use. And one of the reasons why is because of student attention.
Mm,
So if you really want to learn something, you really need to pay attention to that one thing, right? And what ends up happening with technology is that it takes students' attention away. And attention is very fragile. So it's not really that hard to do, especially if you put them in front of a screen. Now, you can block the websites, right? You can
mm,
monitor their screens. But when they're in front of the screen, for the most part, their mind is not on the content. Their mind is, well, how can I get to Instagram or TikTok? And how can I bypass this firewall? That's what they're thinking about. How can I sneak in Netflix without Miss Sam noticing? And so now their full attention is not on the content itself. So that's one, student attention. And then two, it's the difference between an expert and a novice,
mm.
right? So an expert already has the foundational knowledge that they need in order to get the most out of AI. So, for example, I'm a teacher, and if I were to ask AI, let's say I have a lesson plan and I tell AI, okay, create create activities that way I'm able to differentiate, right? It's going to do it based on learning styles. And according to research, learning styles is a myth. And I know that might be a little controversial for some, but it is. And so because learning styles is, but I know that information because I'm the expert. And so I'm able to go, no, actually, that's not the best way to differentiate a lesson plan. Whereas someone who's a novice in teaching, they'll be like, oh, this looks great, right? And that's what's happening with our students. Our students go to elementary, middle school, and high school to get that foundational knowledge, right? Even in high school, they still don't have all the foundational knowledge that they need. And so now they're using AI, right? If we have students using AI, they're not going to be able to know like what information is accurate and what information is not. And then lastly, it offloads all the hard work that is required to build on those foundational skills, right? If we want students to become better writers, they need to practice writing. But if students are offloading that responsibility to AI, well, then they're never going to get better. So that's the issue that I have with tech and AI. Now, I'm not speaking for other educators. I'm speaking for myself. But I think a lot of educators can, relate.
Yeah. No, well said, Marcie. Wow, there were some mic drop moments in that little rant there. But I agree, particularly on that last point. I've had some conversations with teachers recently about, some of the pushback from students or adults in the public about, why are we even teaching students writing, or is writing as important as it used to be? I mean, can't all these AI tools just do it for them? And I think an obvious answer is, well, hold on. If writing is thinking, then we're taking the thinking away from students. We're taking away the ability for them to organize their thoughts and express themselves in an effective way. So, yeah, I think we're headed to some dangerous places if we start to minimize the importance of student writing and some of these basic literacy skills. Well, that was a great pitch. You've given us, hopefully my listeners, a lot to think about there. One more, and this one's just for fun, Marcie. I saw you, and you've got a lot of spicy takes, by the way. It's going to be fun following you on X and Blue Sky and the other places you hang out. I can tell already you're going to push my thinking. One other take that I noticed somewhere in your feed was a bit of a critique of my good friend, not my good friend, he's not a friend, but Peter Liljedahl, who has a practice kind of in my neck of the woods here. And I did a book study on building thinking classrooms. So before you go here, my thought was this. I was like, the whole building thinking classrooms, it like prioritizes student collaboration and communication instead of sort of rote worksheet work. He doesn't put a lot of faith in screens or even homework for that matter. So I saw some alignment, but you obviously have some concerns. So I'd love to hear more about them.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I do like the aspect where he's trying to, no, I do. I actually read
Yeah,
the book. I was
you
actually,
did. Okay.
I actually did. So I do like the focus on collaboration, right? But for me, in my humble opinion, there's a time and a place for it. So I like to focus more on explicit instruction in the beginning of the unit. That way, students have the foundational knowledge that they need in order to apply, reason, and analyze. So I start with explicit instruction, and then I slowly do the gradual release model, where students are, slowly creeping into inquiry-based learning. And the reason why I have to do that, well, I have no other choice. The next generation science standards, right? I need to abide by those. It's my job. So the way that I approach it is, again, I just make sure that students have that foundational knowledge in order to apply, reason, et cetera, et cetera. The problem that I have with building thinking classrooms is that it does it too soon.
That's fair.
Before, yeah, before students have that foundational knowledge. And I think it also promotes the Matthew effect. And so, for those of you who are not familiar with that, it describes how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Mm,
So, in education, this means students who already have strong background knowledge, right, and language skills and problem solving strategies tend to gain more from the building thinking classroom activities than their less prepared peers, if that makes sense. So,
yeah.
because part of building thinking classrooms is that they put them in groups for vertical boards, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you see, the problem with that is that the students who are high achieving, who have stronger background knowledge, they're going to be the ones dominating that activity.
Mm,
Whereas the students that don't have as much background knowledge are going to take on more passive roles. And yeah, I read the book and there's strategies to mitigate that, but then there's another problem with that where how would the teacher know who's struggling and who's not?
mm,
It's really hard to tell in the building thinking classroom environment. Whereas let's compare it to explicit instruction, right? So the way that I do it, if I'm teaching them a problem, we're going to start with step one, step two, step three, step four. I model it, do a think aloud. Students are knowing exactly what I'm doing, exactly how I'm thinking. And then they each have their own mini whiteboards, right? So everyone has one. So then that means everyone gets to participate. So now we're increasing the means participation ratio, right? So now everybody gets to participate, both the high achieving students and the low achieving students. Everybody is participating. And the way that I analyze the data is I tell them, okay, put your boards up. I want to see what you're thinking. And I
right.
do it step by step. I don't have them do the whole problem. So, for example, I'm going to tell my students, okay, I want you to do step one of this problem, just step one. Put it on your mini whiteboards. Okay, three, two, one, go. All right, now put your boards up. One, two, three, boards up. Oh, okay. I see 50% of you are struggling with step one. Let's go over it one more time. Let me see if I can explain it differently, right? So by doing that, I'm able to target exactly where my students are struggling in and provide them the intervention that they need, right? Whereas in the building thinking classroom environment, where, well, that's not so easy to do, right? To
Right.
give a targeted intervention, because how would the teacher know? They have to keep their eye everywhere on all the groups, and it's not systematic. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, no, that was really, really thoughtful, and I don't disagree. And it's been a little while since I've taught math and tried the non-permanent vertical surfaces, I think is what he calls them. And you're right. I mean, just objectively, it's a little trickier. It's a lot trickier to identify and monitor the progress of every student around the room. Now, he does talk about, each group, or sorry, each student in the group of three is sort of taking turns with the marker. So he's trying to make sure that each student is getting involved in the whiteboard. But you're right. I mean, I need to concede that in a group of three in a triad, it's possible that you could have a highly proficient student with a strong personality who kind of just takes over, or to some extent, right? So I think that risk is there. My concern, Marcie, is this actually, and that is if you have a teacher who is not very highly proficient, the freestyle nature of the learning time means that they need to be constantly giving students the next activity sort of intuitively. Like they need to understand, okay, what's the next step in this cognitive process? What's the next step in the scaffold here? And not every teacher, I don't think, is quite there. And so that's where it's helpful to have a baseline, have a good resource, some instruction that they are drawing from. I think in many cases. So thank you for that. I know I know I'm putting you on the spot there a little bit, but I knew you would have something to back it up. So that gives me, and I'm sure many others, a lot to think about. Well, Marcie, this has been fantastic. For those listening, interested in your review process and so much more in the science space, how can we connect with you and follow your work?
Well, I have a blog and it's called scientistinthemaking.com. Originally, I made it for science educators, but because cognitive science principles, I believe, applies to everyone, everyone is welcome. You can also reach me at LinkedIn, on Twitter at Sci in the Making, and Instagram. I'm not as active on Instagram, but you can also find me on Instagram on Scientists in the Making.
All right. Well, all those places seem pretty accessible to me. Thank you again for joining me today, Marcie. I know I'm asking a lot, especially of someone on the Pacific, in the Pacific Standard Time. So thank you so much for getting up early and joining me for this conversation today. Teachers on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Cavey. So grateful that you too decided to spend some of your day listening to this episode. I hope that in some way the content you heard today from Marcie Samayoa sparked your thinking and ignited your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.